Welcome to the Quran True Center for Baha'i History. The center was established by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States in January of 2024. Its purpose is to foster the study of Baha'i history, Baha'i sacred texts, Baha'i philosophical and theological concepts, and world religions from a Baha'i and comparative perspective. I am Robert Stockman, the director of the center, and joining me today is a panel of 3 scholars who recently published papers about Tahirih in a special edition of Hawwa, Journal of Women of the Middle East and the Islamic World. That particular issue was titled From the Seed of Love We Sow. Joining me to introduce the volume and to deliver the first presentation is Omid Ghaemmaghami. He has a PhD of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies from the University of Toronto and is Associate Professor of Middle Eastern Studies in the Department of Middle Eastern and Ancient Mediterranean Studies at Binghamton University, State University of New York. His research interests include themes and topics in Islamic intellectual history and the literature and history of the Bahá'í and Baha'i religions. His recent publications include this special issue of Hawwa, which he was one of the 2 editors, dedicated, of course, to Tahirih, and a new monograph coming out very soon called Exploring the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the Laws and Teachings of the Baha'i Faith, published by I.B. Taurus. His presentation today, after he introduces the volume, is titled He Who Stands on the Tutanjain, The Return of Hussein, the Bab and Janabi Baha in the Prose Writings of Tahirih. So let me now turn all of this over to Omid. Omid, thank you very much for joining us, and also thank you, Mina and Moojan, for joining us today. And I will now...
Rob, I think you may have frozen. Does everyone else?
Mina,
you're back. Great. Super.
I think there's an internet problem here at home, and there's nothing I can do about it. So let me get rid of everyone else and myself, and I'll turn it over to you.
And I think you'll want to turn the PowerPoint over to... There we go. Super. Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you so much to you and to the Quran True Center for Baha'i History for making this space available to us today. It's a real pleasure to join you. Tahirih, also known by the names and titles of Fatimeh, Salmeh, Zakiyeh, Zarrin Taj, and Qurratul Ain, is perhaps best remembered by history for the heroic removal of her veil before an assembled gathering of her co-religionists in a rather unassuming village in northern Persia in the summer of 1848. A mere few weeks before the first ever Women's Rights Convention was held not too far from where I am right now sitting, in the small town of Seneca Falls in upstate New York. Executed 4 years later, in the prime of her life, for her deeds as much as her words, Tahirih was a consecrated believer and enamored lover of the Bab, an eloquent speaker, a gifted poet, a prolific scholar, recognized by no less an academic authority as the Encyclopedia of Religion, as, quote, the first Iranian woman to preach equality of the sexes and religious freedom. Although she was not directly involved in advocating women's suffrage, through proclaiming the advent of a new religion and transcending cultural constraints, and by the central role she played in the Conference of Badasht, Tahirih helped usher in revolutionary transformation in human society. One of the foremost scholars on Tahirih in the United States today, Professor Farzaneh Milani, noted in this connection, quote, "In my opinion, beyond the constitutional revolution and the Islamic revolution, Tahirih is the standard bearer of Iran's third revolution. Hers was a revolution that is not defined by the traditional meanings of the term, but it nonetheless fundamentally changed the political and cultural landscape of the country. It shunned violence and the shedding of blood as the means to solving societal problems. It was gradual. Its foundation was building a new world with new relationships." Perhaps more than any other act, Tahirih's unveiling symbolized the independence of the Bahá'í religion, the only religion which, according to Abbas Amonat, one of the most renowned historians of the period, quote, "consciously and concretely broke away from Islamic beliefs and Islamic community and initiated a new prophetic cycle with its own scripture, sense of community, and vision," unquote. The Bab, who addressed her as Tahirih, meaning the pure one, and included her among the earliest and most eminent adherents of his new religion, lauded Tahirih's uncommon spiritual and intellectual talents and encouraged her to write. He praised Tahirih, or perhaps one of her writings, as one of the greatest signs of God. Elsewhere, he states that Tahirih established the truth of the new religious cause in 3 superb books or treatises written in response to clergy who rejected or repudiated the Bab's message. The Bab supplicated God's glory upon Tahirih and stated that were it not for the letter Fa, in allusion to Tahirih's given name of Fatimeh, God would not have created the heavens, the earth, and everything between them. His writings praise Tahirih as a source of pride to the Bahá'í community, vindicate her, and admonish those who disrespect her. The Bab affirmed that she was thoroughly acquainted with the realities of his mission, and that her very existence garnered honor and respect for the Bahá'í community. And in a prayer written in honor of Tahirih, the Bab extols her as one whose hands, implying perhaps her pen, are filled with the signs of God's inspiration. Just as the Bab's appointment of Tahirih as a leading disciple demonstrated his religion's commitment to improving the position of women, her martyrdom stimulated concern for the conditions of women in her country and throughout the world, and her life continues to be a source of inspiration for millions. In 2015, it occurred to me and my esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. Sasha Dehghani, as we drove in his car one day, that the bicentenary of Tahirih's birth was fast approaching. In honor of that event, and in order to advance further research about Tahirih's life and legacy, we decided to organize and propose a panel for the biannual meeting of the Association for Iranian Studies in Vienna, Austria in the summer of 2016. Professor Negar Motahedeh chaired the panel, during which 4 papers were delivered. After the conference, Dr. Dehghani visited the United States and gave a series of talks about Tahirih at American universities. On the strength of the panel and those talks, we decided to invite other colleagues to contribute original research articles and the foreword to what became a special journal issue dedicated to Tahirih's life, writings, and legacy in the West. The project took several years to gestate before being published in December of 2023 in the journal Hawwa, perhaps the most reputable academic journal dedicated to women of the Middle East. The journal issue marks what I believe is only the 3rd or 4th time that an English language peer-reviewed academic journal has dedicated an entire issue to a Bahá'í or Bahá'í topic. With this introduction in place, I'll move now to some comments about my own article in this special issue. After the events connected with the life and mission of the Bab, the challenge Tahirih posed to prevailing norms of patriarchy through the dramatic and symbolic removal of her veil before an assembled gathering of her co-religionists in the summer of 1848, is perhaps the most significant occurrence in the early years of the movement to which the Bab gave birth and for which Tahirih gave her life at the young age of 35. In addition to this and other acts of heroism and valor, Tahirih's poetic accomplishments are widely celebrated. Her poems, noted for the beauty and power of their composition, continue to be translated and commented on by scholars, including by Dr. Sahba Shayani in a paper he published in the same journal issue and which he will present in this space in about 2 weeks. Tahirih's surviving prose works in Arabic and Persian, whose size far outweighs the number of her extant poems, have not received much attention. My article in Hawwa was a further modest attempt to be surely superseded by hundreds of future studies to partially fill this notable lacuna by exploring Tahirih's prodigious prose oeuvre. Tahirih wrote at least 26 treatises, letters, homilies, and prayers, about 2/3 of which by word count are in Persian and the rest, about 2/3 of which are in Arabic and the rest in Persian. Many of these works are published in sources such as the second, third, and fourth volumes of Fazil Mazandarani's Zuhur al-Haq, the cover of the third volume of which you can see to the left, and Dr. Mohammed Hosseini's tome Hazrat Tahirih, the cover of which can be seen on the right, and which contains a number of prose works of Tahirih that the archives of the Bahá'í World Center provided to be published for the first time. Additionally, in 2012, Harvard University digitized a number of prose works attributed to Tahirih as part of its Women's Worlds in Qajar, Iran project. This collection is publicly available online. This is the landing page of that collection. It includes at least one letter that appears to be in Tahirih's own hand, which you can see here, as well as her seal on the back of another letter. You can see the seal impressions here, which clearly reads, Amatuhu Tahirih, meaning his maidservant or handmaiden Tahirih. This seal, which to my knowledge was first published in this Harvard collection, confirms that Tahirih, and not other names and titles, was the name by which she identified herself. I think we'll hear more about this in Dr. Yazdani's presentation next. Sources suggest that Tahirih wrote a number of other works in prose that may have not survived. Amin Banani, seen here on the left, standing next to Liro Ayos and Firoz Kazimzadeh, a skilled translator of Tahirih's poetry, invited research into Tahirih's prose writings when he wrote, Tahirih was, insofar as her family, her education, her social networks, and her social position defined her, a scholar of religion. A full account of her philosophical, doctrinal, and intellectual positions must include a painstaking and judicious examination and analysis of all her prose writings. As a further attempt to respond to Dr. Banani's call and appreciate the profundity of Tahirih's prose writings, my article in Hawwa explored a neologism Tahirih invokes to describe the Bab, and the many references in her later writings to the Imam Hussein. In the interest of time, I'm going to focus entirely on the second of these themes in this presentation. By way of introduction, 3 key interrelated themes in the prose writings of Tahirih are the renewal of revelation, the dawn of a new day, and the appearance of the Promised One. Tahirih states in her prose writings that messengers and poets, whom she calls, among other things, the interpreters of the divine will and the voices of God's decree, have appeared to guide humanity throughout history. She stresses that all of these, quote, manifestations of the cause of God have promised the advent of the revelation of the Bab and celebrated its virtues. It's therefore not surprising that the writings of Tahirih, despite her not ever having met the Bab in person, are nonetheless replete with references and allusions to the Bab. But in addition to the Bab, Tahirih notably frequently refers to the return of Imam Hussein in her prose writings, especially those composed during the last years of her life. Now, many have observed that Shi'i sources attributed to Muhammad and the Imams include many statements that speak of the return or reappearance of Imam Hussein after the promised Qa'im, the promised one of Twelver Shia Islam. According to these sources, Imam Hussein will return and will be the first figure to return after the Qa'im's lifetime. After the Qa'im dies, Imam Hussein will reign in his stead. One of the foremost scholars of Shia Islam in the West, Mahmud Ayyub, observed that so prominent is Imam Hussein's role in these eschatological texts that it is, quote, indisputable that the entire drama of the consummation of time and history revolves around Hussein, who is its omnipresent hero. As the Bab claimed to be the Qa'im, it is not surprising to find many elusive references to the appearance or return of Hussein in the Bab's writings. Tahirih, intimately familiar with the Bab's writings, also addresses the theme of Hussein's return in her prose works. Perhaps the most striking passage in this regard is this one, found in one of Tahirih's letters. She writes, "I bow down in adoration before the face of Hussein, for indeed he has returned. I humble myself, moreover, before the most great countenance, who has believed in him, and affirm that he is the point whose appearance God has promised and recorded in his verse. We decreed heretofore in the scriptures that my righteous servants shall inherit the earth after the remembrance. Indeed, it has been revealed in the Bayan that he is of a truth him whom God shall make manifest. O my Lord, can he who will be made manifest be anyone other than him who has appeared? No, and to this thy most august and all-compelling glory beareth me witness, for he has appeared with proofs, scriptures, and the splendors of divine decree. Cast away then, O Lord, the veil from all humankind, in order that they may bear witness. These verses have been written for the effulgent splendors that emanate from the lights of Hussein." It would be difficult to avoid the possibility of reading this passage as a sign that Tahirih had intuited that first, Hussein had returned, second, that the Bab had confessed his belief in the returned Hussein, third, that Hussein is him whom God shall make manifest, the figure whose appearance is anticipated throughout the Bayan, and four, that Hussein forms one entity with the Bab, the latter a forerunner to the former. Furthermore, Tahirih understood the concept of return as meaning not the physical return of Hussein, but rather a symbolic or spiritual return. Tahirih's interpretation of the Quranic verse that she quotes here in this passage is original and creative. In one of the earliest Shi'i Quran commentaries, the phrase, "my righteous servants," that Tahirih quotes from in this verse, is defined as the Qa'im and his companions. However, Tahirih appears to suggest that even though the word servants is plural, it alludes to him whom God shall make manifest, the figure whom Tahirih identifies as the return of Hussein and who has appeared after the remembrance, a well-known title of the Bab. The term him whom God shall make manifest receives an extraordinary preferential treatment in the Bayan, the most significant work of the Bab. It refers to the forthcoming manifestation, a figure who will complete, alter, enforce, and even abrogate the laws of the Bayan. Tahirih thus appears to imply that the station of him whom God shall make manifest is so great that this verse of the Quran alludes to this figure using the plural form righteous servants as an honorific of the highest form of respect, not unlike the way the Bible and the Quran employ the majestic plural at times in order to convey the exalted nature and authority of the text and its divine source. In her prose writings, Tahirih avers that the divine cause has returned in its entirety to Hussein fil hin. Now, the Arabic phrase fil hin is rooted in temporality and means at this moment or in an instant. The phrase evokes both a sense of immediacy and a state of imminent expectation. Tahirih uses this phrase in her writings to signal the fast approaching appearance of a new manifestation of God. In a short prose work that begins with the invocation, "In the name of God, the single," she exhorts people to bear witness to the appearance of the face of God, whom God has caused to become manifest fil hin. By employing the phrase fil hin in such passages, Tahirih is perhaps alluding to a famous passage from a letter addressed by Sheikh Ahmad to his student and Tahirih's teacher, Sayyid Qazvin, a letter that Tahirih would surely have known. In this letter, Sheikh Ahmad recalls a verse from the Quran. The verse says, "And after a time shall ye surely know its message." And Sheikh Ahmad states that the tidings of the divine cause will certainly be made manifest after a time, ba'da hin. The word hin in Arabic has a numerical value of 68 in abjad reckoning. Followers of Sheikh Ahmad understood the word as hinting to the advent of the Promised One. Dennis McCuan explains that ba'da hin in this letter of Sheikh Ahmad, the phrase ba'da hin may be read as after 68, namely the year 69, or within the context of the Bahá'í dispensation, beginning in the year 1260, the year 9. The word hin, therefore, is a reference to the year 1268 of the Hijri calendar. Tahirih's statement that the cause of God has returned in Hussein fil hin may therefore mean that Hussein has appeared in the year 1268. As the year 1268 of the Hijri calendar commenced on October 27, 1851 of the Gregorian calendar, this would suggest that these works were written in the last year of Tahirih's life, before her execution in August of 1852. It would therefore appear that Tahirih was keenly conscious of the imminent return of Hussein months before she was killed. As I will soon note, by 1852, one of Tahirih's fellow believers in the Bab was self-identifying as the return of Hussein. Hussein's return had become so urgent to Tahirih that it was practically obsessional. In another of her very short prose works, Tahirih mentions Hussein 25 times. She states that, quote, "tablets, alwah, have shone forth through the countenance of Hussein, and divine verses have glistened and gleamed by his rapture." She cautions that whoever hesitates for even a second to aid and succor Hussein has been cast out of paradise. She proclaims that, quote, "the latter promise has been fulfilled, and the standard been upraised to render assistance to Hussein." Writing in a style strikingly reminiscent to that of the Bab, she exhorts herself to give praise and thanks, stand before Hussein, take from the drops sprinkled from Hussein's ocean, and cast the water of life that has sprung from Hussein's return to all of creation. She then appears to instruct the addressee to enter Ta, an allusion likely to the city of Tehran, to render assistance to Hussein. She supplicates God to remove the veils from those who seek to aid Hussein. She praises God for Hussein's return and avers that the stars and likewise the trees, meaning perhaps all celestial and earthly entities, have prostrated themselves in adoration before the beauty of Hussein. The entire work is a paean of praise to Hussein. At this point, I'd like to inquire into the possible identity of this exalted Hussein, to whom Tahirih refers with increasing frequency in her latter works, and to look more closely for any clues that might indicate to whom she was obliquely alluding, and why she chose to hide the identity of that person in mystical language. In order to properly evaluate these references to Hussein in Tahirih's writings, it is important to recall the many affirmations in her writings that divine revelation would not cease with the Bab. In emphasizing this theme, Tahirih was echoing what is perhaps the most salient and recurring message in the Bab's writings, which refer at first elusively in such works as the Qayyim al-Asma, and later directly to the appearance of a figure whom in the Persian Bayan, the Bab's most important work, is called him whom God shall make manifest. Rather than appoint a successor, the Bab instructed his believers to await the advent of this person. The Bab's writings allude to this figure as, among other things, the son of Ali, meaning Hussein, and 238, the numerical equivalent in abjad reckoning of the name Hussein Ali. The Bahá'í chronicler Nabil Azam avers that Tahirih came to believe that this figure was none other than her co-religionist Mirza Hussein Ali of Nur, who was designated by the name Baha, known among the early Babis as Janab Baha, and who would of course later assume the title of Baha'u'llah. Janab Baha claimed to be the return of Imam Hussein beginning at least as early as 1851. He signed his name in many of his early writings as the Ha before the Sin 152, Ha before the Sin being the first two letters of the Arabic name Hussein, and 152 referring to the name Baha. In later writings, Baha'u'llah self-identified with Imam Hussein perhaps more than any other historical figure. Tahirih appears to allude to Janab Baha in many of her writings as the honorific plural Ishan, meaning they or him, and the countenance of Baha, among other things. Furthermore, some of the many explicit references to Hussein in her writings give the impression of being allusions to Janab Baha. She proclaims this to be the day in which Hussein is gleaming and glistening from the garment of Baha. In one of the prayers she wrote, Tahirih beseeches God to shield from every misfortune him whom you have supported with victory, he whose return, the mystery of Muhammad, has been promised, and to grant that the day of attaining Hussein's presence may be made manifest. Seemingly alluding in the same prayer to Janab Baha as the point of Baha, and to the Bab and Janab Baha as the 2 points, Tahirih beseeches God to protect all who circumambulate the twin points and keep them steadfast in your most great cause, so that they may behold the point illuminating their inmost realities. These references suggest that Tahirih understood that Janab Baha was the return of Imam Hussein, a claim that, as mentioned, Janab Baha began making in the last year of Tahirih's life. The eldest son of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, who met Tahirih as a child, recalls that in her speeches, Tahirih expatiated upon the principle of progressive revelation and perceived that Janab Baha would soon claim to be the figure promised by the Bab. Amonat suggested that Tahirih's association with Janab Baha may have been among the factors that led to her murder in the aftermath of the failed assassination attempt on Nasiruddin Shah in 1852, since Janab Baha had emerged as a clear leader of the Babi community and was perceived as a political threat by the Shah's mother. These sources support the famed Islamicist Anne-Marie Chabel's assertion that Tahirih, quote, hailed Janab Baha as the awaited leader of the Babi community, unquote. Baha'u'llah would years later write that Tahirih, quote, recognized his station and his new cause. Baha'u'llah spoke about Tahirih's veneration and cited verses from her poetry. Of Tahirih, he wrote, "She was with this servant for a time. She would not barter one moment's meeting with this youth for the sovereignty of this world and the next, nor for less than an instant did she wish for separation." I think, Rob, I'll end here my short presentation of my article so as to provide Dr. Yazdani and Dr. Momen ample opportunity to deliver their remarks.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Omid. That was really, really fascinating. And people, I'm sure, will have questions. What we suggest is that everybody type their questions over in the margin. And when we hear all three talks, we will then turn to the questions and go through them at that point. So let me now take Omid out and add Mina Yazdani to our screen here and introduce her. Mina Yazdani is a professor of history at Eastern Kentucky University. She's the author of numerous works in Iranian and Baha'i studies, including the monograph Awza'e Ejtima'i Iran der Ahde Qajar. I said it much better the first time. As Khilale Asare Mubarakeh Baha'i. That is, in English, Iran at the time of the Qajar dynasty, a perspective from the Baha'i sacred writings. This was published in 2003. And the title of her talk today, if I can get this silly thing out of my way so I can read it, is Layers of Veils Obscuring the Image of Tahirih Qurrat al-Ain. So thank you so much for your presentation today, Mina. We're looking forward to hearing it, and I will now remove myself from the screen so we can focus on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. In the opening paragraph of his introductory article to a book containing translations of Tahirih's poetry, Amin Banani, alluding to Tahirih's act of removing the veil from her face in a public gathering in 1848, writes, quote, "In her own nation, most of what has been said and written about her since was intended to cover her over again with many layers of veils." In this talk, I will explore some of the layers of veils that have obscured Tahirih Qurrat al-Ain. Accusations against her appeared during her lifetime and continue to the contemporary period, taking on new forms, as I will demonstrate. While these accusations originated in the threats she posed to the two main societal institutions of patriarchy and established religion, the dominant form of the accusations showed a progression over time, reflecting at each period the main concerns, obsessions, and preoccupations of that particular period. Moreover, given the fact that Baha'is cherish Tahirih's memory as an integral element of the history of their religion, allegations against her have also been motivated by counter-Baha'i attitudes, forming an integral part of anti-Baha'i discourse. Covering Tahirih in veils, however, has gone beyond the realm of sheer polemics. It has entered academic studies. In doing so, the identity Tahirih undeniably chose for herself has been denied, only to replace it with identities of the relevant scholars liking. With this introduction, I will now turn to the various veils that have been woven to cover Tahirih. I start with the veil of sexual perversity. Accusations of sexual misconduct against Tahirih appeared in works written close to her time. Though not polemics in the strict sense of the term, the two most significant works of official historiography during the Qajar time included false historical accounts of the eventful years of the Babi period. Both the literary scholar and royal tutor Reza Quli Khan Hidayat's Rawzat al-Safai Nasiri and scholar and court official Muhammad Taqi Seper's Lisan al-Mulk in his volume dedicated to the Qajar dynasty in Nasikh al-Tawarikh cover Qajar history up to the year 1857. Therefore, they must have been finished around that year. I will focus particularly on Seper's account. Seper's account of Tahirih, which Abbas Amanat describes as, quote, widely fictitious, became a major source for numerous later works. In fact, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Seper's narrative had a determining role in shaping the public image of Tahirih amongst Iranians until recent decades. This is particularly true of his account of Tahirih and the Badasht episode. In Seper's account, Tahirih made it lawful for a woman to marry 9 men, and the followers of the Bab who were away from their wives in Badasht for a long time circled around Tahirih with a special admiration. Seper went on to a more graphic storyline, which I prefer to skip for obvious reasons. A few years after Seper wrote his account of Tahirih and Badasht, the Qajar prince Ali Quli Mirza I'tizad al-Sultaneh repeated Seper's accusation in his own book on false Mahdis, verbatim. The account of Tahirih, which up to that point had only been recorded in state-sponsored chronicles, now found their way into outright polemics. Some 5 decades after I'tizad al-Sultaneh's death in 1954, Abdul Hussein Navai, a scholar trained in law but more interested in history, edited and published a part of I'tizad al-Sultaneh's book under the title Fitne Bab, the sedition of the Bab. Navai added 3 appendices, including one in refutation of Tahirih, asserting that her motivation to announce the abrogation of the laws of Islam was her promiscuity. He also took the opportunity to add the one statement about Tahirih in Seper's narrative that I'tizad al-Sultaneh had missed. Her alleged statement that it was permissible for every woman to marry 9 men. While I'tizad al-Sultaneh dealt with her refutation of the Bab's mission only, Navai's edition could well be placed in the category of anti-Bahá'í polemics, as one of the 3 appendices he added was on Baha'u'llah, whom the overwhelming majority of Babis had embraced as the one whose advent the Bab had promised. For Baha'is, the history of the Babi religion, Tahirih included, is part of their own. Most other anti-Baha'i polemics written in the 20th century also repeated the content of Nasikh al-Tawarikh about Tahirih, usually with some embellishment from the author. The list is long, and I have to skip most of what is there and to just focus on the more important topics. The appearance of sexual accusations against Tahirih in anti-Baha'i polemics is not a surprise. Refutations and attacks on new religions are of course, a known phenomenon. American theologian Harvey Cox has shown that throughout Western history, there have been recurring themes or myths used to characterize deviant and minority religions. He classifies these myths as first, the subversion myth, Second, the myth of sexual or behavioral deviancy fueling orgiastic behavior. Third, the myth of dissimulation. And fourth, the myth of participating in marginalized movements being involuntary. So although they depend largely on the socio-political conditions and concerns of any particular moment, all these themes have in varying capacities appeared in anti-Bahá'í polemics. Cox's myth of sexual or behavioral deviancy fueling orgiastic behavior had long been used in Persia, even before the advent of Islam, as a cultural label to refute reformist and progressive religious movements. The reforming Zoroastrian priest Mazdak, for example, was accused of having advocated the common ownership of women. In the polemics against the Babi and Bahá'í religions, this myth has been a perennial theme, and as the examples showed, Tahirih, as a leading figure, is usually the main target for accusation of sexual promiscuity. With the consolidation of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the later half of the 1980s, efforts were made by revolutionary government to produce narratives of the past to its own liking. For example, the government sponsored the establishment of 2 institutions for historical and political research, each with large budgets and broad access to rich archives, and charged them with the mission to read the past and write about it in ways compatible with its official views. The result of such policies has been the appearance of pseudo-historiography, works that combine an array of real historical documents and facts with a body of lies and distortions. A prime example of such works was written in 2011 on Sheikhis, the adherents of Sheikhism, a philosophical and esoteric school of 12 Shia Islam, from which many of the devoted followers of the Bab emerged. The author of this work, Mehdi Nur Mohammadi, devoted a full chapter on Tahirih. In more recent years, Nur Mohammadi republished that chapter with minimal change as an independent volume on the life, belief, and death of Tahirih. Nur Mohammadi quotes Seper's section on Tahirih without any critical appraisal. His own language is hostile for the most part and reflects the endorsement of the image created by Seper. He refers to the Badasht episode as one of the most shameful and darkest episodes in the history of Babism and Bahá'ísm. Parenthetically, Mohammadi's reference to the significance of Badasht for the history of Bahá'ísm is interesting, considering the fact that he simultaneously insists that Baha'is have no reason to connect Tahirih to their religion. This, when he also devotes a section to refuting Baha'u'llah in a book that is ostensibly about Tahirih. Nur Mohammadi further writes the scandal, quote, scandal of the Badasht, where he claims, quote, all the religious and moral laws were abandoned. He elaborates on Tahirih's intense desire for men, was a quote from him, and her advocacy of, quote, sharing women and properties. From Nur Mohammadi's viewpoint, Tahirih's beauty and, quote, feminine appeals were among the reasons why men were attracted to the religion of the Bab. Nur Mohammadi also elaborates on a new but related theme, Tahirih's divorce. He claims that Tahirih leaving her husband and children is proof that she should never be taken as a role model for Iranian women. These remarks, the like of which were not found in all their diatribes against Tahirih, were not accidentally made. They were most likely a reaction against a growing popularity of Tahirih among Iranian feminists as reflected in a significant movement, the campaign for 1 million signature, launched in 2006 in Iran, which aimed to protest discriminatory laws against women and to demand their revision. To collect signature, the activists involved adopted a street strategy, going from house to house or meeting people face to face in various public spaces. They chose the words face to face, street to street as their motto. Their method was inspired by and their motto borrowed from of Tahirih's most famous poems, one of Tahirih's most famous poems, a fact acknowledged by one of the founders of the campaign, Nushin Ahmadi Khorasani. The second category of allegations is about denying the authorship of her poems. To everyone interested in Persian literature in modern times, the idea that some of the famous poems usually known as having been authored by Tahirih are in fact not hers is familiar. Like the accusations about Tahirih's chastity, the denial of the authorship of her poems was also expressed early on in Nasikh al-Tawarikh. In Seper's account, even the poems Tahirih and her companions were chanting upon leaving Badasht en route to Mazandaran were not the poems of Tahirih, but rather poems composed by her Huda driver. 3 to 4 decades after Seper made this misattribution, the Iranologist Edward Brown made a related observation during his journey to Iran in 1889. He wrote, given the odium which attached to the name of Babi among Muslims, it was impossible for them to recite the poems of the Babi poetess. Therefore, Brown concluded, it would seem extremely probable that they should seek to justify their right to admire them by attributing them to some other writer. It is important to note that Nur Mohammadi claims in his monograph on Tahirih, published in Islamic Republic of Iran, in order to undermine her, that Baha'is, in order to make up a virtue for Qurratul Ain and make her look like a competent poet, have ascribed to her whatever suspicious poem or poems similar to hers they have seen. The author's reference to Baha'is supports the argument that discrediting Tahirih in our times can best be understood in the context of anti-Baha'i attitudes. There is at least a correlation between these two phenomena. Another accusation is about her having a disturbed mind. Ahmad Kasravi was a 20th century Iranian influential social thinker, prominent historian, a pioneer of Iran's linguistic studies, well-known social and religious reformer with a sense of prophetic mission and prolific author. In 1943, he published an anti-Baha'i polemic titled Baha'i Gari, in which he devoted a few pages to Tahirih because her life was, quote, one of those things Baha'is boast about to the world. Acknowledging that she was a learned woman and even incorporating one of her famous poems in his book, Kasravi came to the conclusion that her dedication to the Bab was due to her mind being, quote, disturbed and distressed, and herself being agitated. Ignoring the facts that she was in constant communication with the Bab before her arrest, that she translated the Bab's commentary on Quranic Surah of Joseph, and that she taught his commentary on the Quranic Surah of Kawthar, Kasravi reasoned that, quote, there is no doubt that Qurratul Ain had not met the Bab and had heard only very little from his words. It goes without saying then that her frenzied state, shuridegi, had to do with her own mind. In Kasravi's account, the influence of Shi'i, Sheikhi, and Sufi thought had so disturbed Tahirih that she suffered a mental illness and hence accepted the call of the Bab. Another accusation or allegation is about Tahirih being a Shia Muslim, a militant Shi'i Muslim. The proponents of the aforementioned allegations against Tahirih, despite their differences, at least accepted her as who she was, a follower of the Bab and a believer in a new religion whose radical departure from Islam she advocated. It was in Western academia in the 21st century that she was denied the core of her identity. Rather than viewing Tahirih as she was herself, which is verifiable through her extant works, two Iranian scholars have imposed their own wishes and preferences on her. Soraya Adambakan, a scholar who has studied the religion and societal consequences of Tahirih's action, claims that at the end of her life, Tahirih's religious attitude was grounded in deep mysticism. By contrast, Anne-Marie Schimmel, the author of the entry on Tahirih in the Encyclopedia of Religion, and one of the foremost scholars of Islamic mysticism, does not corroborate such a view and introduces Tahirih as, quote, a Babi preacher and poet and their first woman martyr. When interviewed in a documentary on Tahirih, Adambakan stated, quote, I personally believe that Qurratul Ain, from her own point of view, never left the arena of Islam. She just interpreted what she understood from Islam. In fact, she believes the step she is taking is a step taken in Islam, a phase foretold in Islam which must be fulfilled. A similar claim has been advocated by Hamid Dabashi of Columbia University, who replaces Adambakan's mysticism with its opposite, militancy. Dabashi defines Tahirih as a Shi'i revolutionary. His depiction of Tahirih is corollary to his interpretation of the Babi religion as a more or less an extension of 12er Shi'i Islam. He called the Babi religion, quote, the very first modern Shi'i revolution. Such a uniquely bold statement has been made possible by a selective and highly interpretive reading of a couple of secondary sources on the topic. Dabashi projects the ideal image he has carved out on Tahirih in support of his thesis that Shia Islam is a religion of protest. According to Dabashi, in Badasht, Tahirih insisted on, quote, a collective armed rebellion without any evidence and despite all the counter evidence. That the unveiling in Badasht was aimed at announcing the independence of the Bab's religion from Islam remains essentially uncontested. This is the pivotal point on which the main academic sources on Badasht unequivocally agree. In a letter written to strengthen the faith of some of her fellow believers, Tahirih writes that the Bab commanded her to tell her husband that the cause of the Bab is not like that of Ahmad, meaning Muhammad. She adds that she had informed the believers in the Bab of the new verses from God, and alluding to Quran chapter 7 verse 161, exhorts them to, quote, enter the new gate prostrating. Had Dabashi explored the extant writings of the figure about whom he wrote more than 25 pages, he would have learned that nothing in her writings promotes militancy. He would have seen, on the contrary, that Tahirih interprets the Quranic verses on fighting and combat, qital, in spiritual terms, as meaning the defeat of one's own lower self, nafs, as discussed in Omid Ghaemmaghami's recently published article, which analyzes some of her prose writings. The last accusation that I explore is accusation of being violent and aggressive. Tahirih's uncle and father-in-law, who was a staunch, prominent Usuli Mujtahid, was assassinated while praying in his mosque in September 1847. Because he vehemently opposed the belief and activities of Tahirih, and because he had publicly cursed the founder of Sheikhi school as well as the Bab, Tahirih's estranged husband believed that she had planned the assassination. However, Tahirih was cleared of the charges against her. That she had nothing to do with the murder is now a matter of historic record. Polemicists, however, did not care about the lack of evidence. Many of them went on to openly accuse her of complicity in her uncle's assassination. Almost all of them devoted some lines to this allegation. The authors of more recently published works, however, are more keen to devote attention to this particular topic. This relatively recent shift to depicting Tahirih as violent seems to have to do with the notoriety that actions of some extremist Muslims have gained. The horror and hatred that the actions of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS have caused is likely to have directed Nur Muhammadi to misrepresent Tahirih as being similar to them. What more effective way could he have found to depict Tahirih in as negative a light as possible? To conclude, Tahirih has been shrouded in layers covering her true identity, which threatened the status quo of mid-19th century Iran. Early attacks on Tahirih, such as those found in Nasikh al-Tawarikh, were attempts to respond to the challenges she posed to two established systems, Shia Islam, or more generally the Islamic dispensation, and patriarchy. Her unveiling at Badasht expressed the birth of a new religion, a new type of social system, a new type of believer, and a new type of human being. It was not merely a feminist challenging patriarchy or a religious person challenging the established religion. It was someone announcing a religion that by its nature challenged the normative religious and cultural values of the time. Any woman attempting to challenge patriarchy would have to incur social cost. Anyone summoning people to a new religion would face extreme opposition. Tahirih was doing both, and the social cost she incurred was tremendous. Tahirih was the target of both intense misogyny and religious prejudice. Her voice and identity as an intelligent woman who challenged the patriarchal and religious norms of society were either silenced or distorted. That reactions towards Tahirih, mostly in writing, have continued for more than 170 years after her death indicates the relevance of her short but rich life to our time, be it the history of religion, the life of women in the modern Middle East and their struggle for social rights or Persian literary history. Tahirih continues to be relevant and continues to unveil herself.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mina. That was really a very illuminating presentation. I had no idea a lot of those details of the kind of treatment that she had experienced, and so we're very grateful for that. Turning now to Moojan Momen, I will remove Mina and add Moojan, and after I introduce him, I'll add his PowerPoint to the stage as well. Moojan Momen lives in the United Kingdom and is a retired medical doctor by profession. In his spare time, he likes to study Baha'i history and other aspects of the Baha'i faith. He has also studied Islam, especially Shia Islam, and the phenomenon of religion in general. He's married with 2 children and 2 grandchildren. His most recent books have been a 2-volume history on the Baha'i communities of Iran, which he edited, and a contribution to a history called The Baha'i Faith, the Baha'i Community of the British Isles, which came out also fairly recently, both by George Ronald. The title of his talk today is Tahirih and the Religious World of 19th Century Qazvin. So thank you so much for joining us, Moojan. We're delighted to hear your presentation.
Thank you. And yes, thank you, Rob, for organizing this seminar. Okay, so the topic that I'm going to be dealing with in this presentation is really looking at the religious world of the early 19th century Qazvin as the background to Tahirih's life. She was born, the dates vary, between 1814 and 1817, but around that time anyway. And she lived until 1848 in Qazvin with a period of time away. And what I want to look at is the social and religious environment of that town as the sort of backdrop to Tahirih's life. So I'm going to look at the rise and fall and rise again of Qazvin itself. I'll explain that in a minute. I want to try and create a map of early 19th century Qazvin and plot the different neighborhoods in the town by their religious affiliation, and then look at the religious divisions in Qazvin, both in the period before the life of Tahirih and then during her life. Qazvin had been the capital of Iran for the second quarter of the Safavid period, from about 1546 to 1596. So this is now 250 years before Tahirih's time. And at around a European traveller, Thomas Herbert, in 1628 had estimated the population as being around 200,000 persons living in 20,000 houses. That's at that time roughly the same population as London, for example. Jean Chardin, and you'll notice that there was a sort of progressive decline in the population of Qazvin over the subsequent decades and centuries, going down to the low point at around the time of Tahirih's birth. Gaspard Trouville in 1810 notes 10,000 persons, and he states that 4/5 of the town was in ruins at that time. So that 10,000 persons around 1810, around the time of the birth of Tahirih, marks the low point in Qazvin's development, Qazvin's history, because from that time onwards, the population rises again during the course of the 19th century, going from that low point of 10,000 at the beginning of the 19th century. It gradually goes up, 25,000, 32,000 in 1881, and then an estimate in 1914 of 40,000. And that change from 10,000 to 40,000 is an important one in what I'm going to say in a minute. But going on to sort of think about what were the causes of this revival of Qazvin as a town during the 19th century, I think the following map demonstrates why Qazvin increased in importance during the 19th century. So the importance was in the trade routes that brought goods from Europe to Tehran and to the rest of Iran during that period, but particularly the northern part of Iran and Tehran in particular. So the trade routes in the early part of the 19th century were overland from Trebizond on the Black Sea coast, down through Tabriz, and then through Qazvin to Tehran. Then in 1862, when the British established steam navigation on the Tigris River, European merchants, Europeans would bring goods to the mouth of the Tigris and then transport it by steam navigation up to Baghdad and then overland to Tehran. The merchants were always trying to minimize the amount of overland travel that they had to do, because overland travel was on pack animals going at maybe 6 miles an hour, and consequently very slow and dangerous and awkward. So they were trying to minimize the amount of overland travel that they had to do, and so they switched to this route of Baghdad, but that route also went through Qazvin to Tehran. And then in 1883, the railway between Batumi and Baku was completed, and at that time the trade route switched to going across the Caucasus by using this train to Baku, then by ship to Anzali, and then again down through Qazvin to Tehran. And that route was confirmed at the end of the 19th century, when a paved road was built by the Russians from Anzali to Tehran, making it possible to not use pack animals at all, but to use carriages and wagons to transport the goods. So all three of these stages of the 19th century, Qazvin was a hub, and therefore the merchants of Qazvin were very important, and that's important in Bahá'í history, because some of the most important Babis and Baha'is were merchants. In Qazvin were merchants. So now going on to creating a map of early 19th century Qazvin. Well, the first thing to say is we don't have a map of early 19th century Qazvin, so we're forced to try and speculate about what such a map could have looked like. And the starting point for that is this map, which is a map drawn by the British in 1919, based on an aerial photograph taken in 1918, showing what Qazvin looked like at that time. And you'll remember from the statistics I gave you before that Qazvin had grown from a town of 10,000 to 40,000 by 1914. So at the time this map was taken, Qazvin was 4 times the size it was in the early years of the 19th century when Tahirih was born and during her upbringing. So trying to then go back to a map of what Qazvin would have looked like at the beginning of the 19th century, what I have done is to take the boundaries as shown on this map, 1918, and then shrink them back to the various quarters of Qazvin and the buildings in Qazvin that we know existed in the early 19th century. And the result is that we go from the outline of the map. On this map, the continuous outline in black is the map that you've just seen from 1919, going round like this. And then the dotted line is a putative suggested map for the early 19th century, based on buildings and quarters of Qazvin that we know existed at that time. and bearing in mind that the town had we need to shrink the town to a population of 10,000 from a population of 40,000. So I've sort of restricted it just to those buildings and those quarters that we know existed at that time. And that's helped also by the fact that there's a print of Qazvin showing this building, Imamzadeh Hussein, as being outside, well outside the walls of Qazvin, so that southern boundary is fairly firmly established. So concentrating then on this putative map of early 19th century Qazvin, what we've got is, first of all, these green lines are the roads. The line off to the right here is the road going to Tehran. Off to the east. Then the road going in the opposite direction is the road going off to towards Rasht, and this road going off to the south is the road going to Tabriz and to Hamadan. So these are the routes by which goods entered Qazvin. And these blue buildings here are the commercial and administrative area of the town. So the blue strip there is the bazaar, and these other buildings are the sarais, the caravanserais. And the word caravanserai tends to conjure up in people's thoughts the idea of somewhere where people would spend the night. But the sarais in this period were actually the offices of the wholesale merchants who would be importing goods from outside of Qazvin and sending them on to other destinations. So they would be bringing goods from, say, Tabriz into Qazvin and then sending them on to Tehran, or from Baghdad, or from Tabriz, from Rasht. So these were these buildings here, and also the administrative buildings were in this area as well. So that's the significance of these blue buildings. And then the significance of these two colors, the pink and the yellow, are that, well, sorry, the next thing to say is this river, the blue ribbon going down this way, that was the river, the Bazar River, that divided the town into a western and a smaller western part and an east and a larger eastern part. And this also was a divide, one of the divides, or one of the divisions in Qazvin, because this western part, the smaller western part, was Turkish speaking, and the eastern part was Persian speaking. I expect all of you know that northwestern Iran is Turkish speaking, and as you go down the road from Tabriz to Tehran, you start getting increasing numbers of Persian speakers until it becomes Persian speaking. And Qazvin was one of the towns on this boundary between the Turkish and the Persian speaking, and the western suburbs to the west of the Bazar River were Turkish speaking, and these areas to the east were Persian speaking. The other divide in Qazvin was the divide, a religious divide. The whole town was 12 Shi'i. That means Shi'is who accepted the line of 12 imams. But within 12 Shi'ism, there was a difference between, there was two schools, or the Usuli school and the Akhbari school. And the Usulis were the yellow areas that I've got on this map were the Usulis, and the pink areas were the Akhbari areas of the town. I base this on knowledge of the fact that the religious leaders in these yellow areas were Akhbaris, and both the mosque here and the religious leader here and the areas and the residences of a number of Akhbaris that we know of were in these pink areas. And the third, I mean, those two divisions, the linguistic division and the religious difference division, is fairly well established on the basis of evidence. The third one I'm going to suggest is slightly more speculative, and that is that there was a difference also in status and wealth, and that because these because with merchants that we know of and other officials lived in these Akhbari areas, it's likely that the Akhbari areas were also relatively higher status and wealthier than these other areas, the Usuli areas. But that's speculative. I'm not absolutely sure of that. But what's interesting is that the person of Tahirih, in a sense, acted as a bridge between these various divisions in Qazvin in the early 19th century. She came from a Persian-speaking family, but her father and her uncle were the religious leaders of this Turkish-speaking area, and she lived in this Turkish-speaking area. And so therefore it's almost certain that she grew up able to speak Turkish as well as Persian. And in fact, there is an Azerbaijani scholar who has identified a poem that she states is by Tahirih in Turkish. So I'm not competent to judge this matter, but if she's correct, then we have evidence not only that Tahirih wrote poetry in Persian, but also that she spoke and wrote poetry in Turkish. So she bridged that linguistic divide between the two, linguistic divide in Qazvin. Her father and her uncle were two of the main leaders of the Usulis in Qazvin, while her maternal family were the leading family of the Akhbaris in Qazvin. So in herself, she bridged that divide as well. And during the course of her life, she started life with a very high status, being the daughter of a very prominent figure in Qazvin. And because of the stand that she took and the religious choices that she made, she was stripped of this high status and suffered a loss of reputation and status. And so in a sense, she also bridged this high status to low status divide in Qazvin. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about this religious divide in a bit more detail, because some people may not know what Usuli and Akhbari are. They were basically two schools in Twelver Shi'ism that were competing with each other throughout the whole of the Safavid period. In other words, the 2 centuries from the 15th and the 16th and 17th centuries, and then also into the 18th century. By the time of Tahirih's birth, the Usulis were definitely in the ascendant, and the Akhbaris were in retreat. But for 100 years previously, it had been the Akhbaris who had been in the ascendant and the Usulis in retreat. And the difference between the two is mainly it's a jurisprudential difference. Mainly, it's a matter of the fact that the Akhbaris would look only to the Quran and the traditions of the Imams as the source of their religious rulings, whereas the Usulis also included various rational methodologies for deriving judgments on matters where there isn't a direct tradition from the Imams about a particular matter. If something's raised with them that there isn't any specific tradition relating to that matter, they would use rational principles for deriving judgments, whereas the Akhbaris refused to do that. So this difference, as I say, was the basis of this divide within Qazvin. And I'm going to deal first with the Akhbaris, which is this pink area here. The leading cleric on that side, on the Akhbari side, was Mullah Abdul Wahhab Sharif Qazvini. He came from a very prominent Qazvin clerical family, and when the Shah Mosque was completed by Muhammad Shah, control of it was handed over to Mullah Abdul Wahhab because he was regarded as the top-ranking cleric of Qazvin. The evidence of his writings indicate that he was, at the beginning of the 19th century, an Akhbari, and it was his sister Amineh who married Mullah Saleh Baraghani and was the mother of Tahirih. So he was the maternal uncle of Tahirih. And he had control of the Masjid al-Shah. This is a 19th century print of the this building here is the entrance to the Masjid al-Shah, and as I said, the surrounding area was a commercial area, and you can see here these on either side. These are probably some of the sarais, the offices of the wholesale merchants, and you can also see some shops and so on. So this is the area. The part of the Akhbari area in the town. This is the next one is the courtyard of the Masjid al-Shah, the Shah Mosque, which Mullah Abdul Wahhab was in control of. Yes, so that's a picture of the inside of that mosque. Going on then to the other group, the Usulis in Qazvin. And concentrating on the Baraghani brothers, there were other Usuli clerics in Qazvin, but I'm going to concentrate just on the Baraghani brothers. Their father, Sheikh Muhammad al-Malaika, had been expelled from Qazvin as an Usuli by the Akhbaris in 1751. So that's about 60 years before Tahirih's birth. And his three sons had managed to come back into Qazvin in about 1810 and re-establish themselves and establish themselves in Qazvin as Usuli clerics. The eldest of them, Mullah Taghi, was a zealous Usuli and very aggressive, both in terms of grasping wealth and in grasping power. He used to charge for services that other clerics gave for free, and he was grasping for power as well, and he grasped the position of Imam Jum'ah when the incumbent failed to perform the prayers for a few consecutive weeks. The next brother, Mullah Saleh, was a milder Usuli. He was the father of Tahirih, and his main interest was that he set up a madrasa, a teaching center, a religious college, you might say, in which a group of clerics would teach students from across central Iran. And interestingly, he also set up a madrasa for women. That was very unusual in Iran at that time. And it was his daughter who married, he married Amineh, and it was his daughter was Tahirih. Amineh herself was the mother of Tahirih, was well educated and received 3 ijazahs. These were certificates of completion of her education from 3 different teachers. The youngest brother actually was the opposite of those 2 brothers religiously. He was an Akhbari and later a Sheikhi. And his interest was more in Irfan, which is mystical philosophy, mysticism and mystical philosophy. Okay, so these were the 3 Baraghani brothers who controlled the western suburbs of the western part of Qazvin, which, as I said, was the Turkish area and was Usuli. These are some pictures of the Salahiyya, the madrasa, the religious college founded by Tahirih's father. It was built in 1817, which, according to Bahá'í accounts, was also the year of the birth of Tahirih herself. It was one of the largest in area in Iran, one of the largest madrasas in terms of the area that it occupied in Iran, having 82 rooms. The number of teachers varied over time, up to 7 to 8 teachers, 700 students at its peak. And as I say, it had this section for women, which was very unusual in Iran at this time. And Tahirih herself studied there and later taught in this women's section of the college, and as did indeed her mother. I've just put this picture in here because this is the picture when I show this to Baha'is in Qazvin, they say, oh yes, that's the house of Tahirih. It's actually, I don't think the house of Tahirih. I think it was the house of Tahirih's maternal family, because this house is located in the Akhbari area. And so therefore, I think it was probably her mother's home, childhood home, and home where she was brought up. And Tahirih would have obviously visited very frequently when she visited her maternal relatives, but I don't think it actually was the house of Tahirih. Tahirih herself was born in 1814 according to family sources, and in 1817 according to Baha'i sources, and this makes her either 5 or 8 years old when Sheikh Ahmad al-Ahsai arrived in Qazvin in 1822, early 1822. This is Sheikh Ahmad on the right-hand side of this picture. Sheikh Ahmad was invited to Qazvin by Mullah Abdul Wahab, Tahirih's maternal uncle, and Mullah Abdul Wahab not only arranged for him to be housed in Qazvin, but he gave over the pulpit of his mosque, the Shah Mosque, the main mosque in Qazvin, to Sheikh Ahmad to preach from. And Sheikh Ahmad drew large numbers of people. It's recorded that sort of people flocked to hear him. And this caused enmity with Mullah Taghi Baraghani, because not only was Sheikh Ahmad preaching in the Akhbari section of the town, but Mullah Taghi liked to think of himself as the senior cleric of Qazvin, and he wrote to Sheikh Ahmad saying, why it's customary for clerics, prominent clerics, when they arrive to go and visit and reside with the most prominent cleric in that town, and I'm the most prominent cleric in the town, so why didn't you come and visit me and stay with me? And Sheikh Ahmad gave him a polite reply, but nevertheless, Mullah Taghi kept on and on in his enmity towards Sheikh Ahmad, and eventually came out with a takfir, which means a declaration that someone is a kafir or infidel, a declaration of being an infidel against Sheikh Ahmad. Such a declaration is really quite an extreme thing, because basically it means he's declaring Sheikh Ahmad not just that he's disagreeing with Sheikh Ahmad, but he's declaring Sheikh Ahmad to be outside the pale of Islam altogether. And potentially, therefore, for example, you could kill him with impunity according to Islamic law. So it's a fairly extreme measure. It was very uncommon in Shi'i Islam prior to this period. During the whole of the Safavid period, there had been debates between Usulis and Akhbaris without anyone resorting to takfir against one another. The first person to use takfir was Aka Wahid Behbahani, when he was opposing the Akhbaris in Karbala. And this takfir by Mullah Taqi was a second example being used against the Shaykhis. And so Qazvin therefore went from an Usuli Akhbari divide to an Usuli Shaykhi divide across the town, with what had been the Akhbari sectors of the town becoming, as far as I can tell, I mean, I can't be sure of this, but mainly Shaykhi. Tahirih herself, as she grew up, as I say, her family was divided, with her mother, her maternal family, including Mullah Abdul Wahab, and also her youngest paternal uncle, Mullah Ali, being Shaykhis, while her father-in-law and her husband were Usulis. She herself studied and taught at her father's Usuli school, the Salahiyah, but opposed her father-in-law and husband, and followed her mother and became a Shaykhi. She left Qazvin for Karbala, wanting to study under the leader of the Shaykhi school, Sayyid Kazem, who was at the time resident in Karbala, but she arrived in Karbala just after he had passed away in 1843. And while she was in Karbala, she adopted the Babi movement. She became a Babi, and indeed a letter of the living of the Bab, the most prominent, the 18 most prominent earliest and most prominent disciples of the Bab. She returned to Qazvin in mid-1847, and this caused an upsurge in rhetoric by her uncle Mullah Taqi against the Babis. He caused a Shaykhi to be arrested and humiliated publicly, and he attacked and cursed both Sheikh Ahmad and the Bab from the pulpit. And this led to his murder by a Shaykhi. He was attacked on the 25th of October. He actually died a couple of days later, but 25th October was the date that he was attacked in a mosque, in his own mosque in Qazvin. And following this, there was a upsurge of violence against the Shaykhis. Tahirih herself had to confine herself to her father's house, and eventually was spirited away from Qazvin by Baha'u'llah in the spring of 1848 to get out of this situation of being virtually under house arrest in her father's house, and in danger physically of violence from her husband, and who was blaming her for the death of his father. I just presenting these two pictures as interesting pictures. I don't know to what extent you can see that, but it's a depiction. This is from a book that was of the writings of Mullah Taqi, Tahirih's uncle, and it's a depiction of his murder in his mosque. And it actually shows two assassins, although most accounts seem to say there was only one assassin. But what's interesting is this figure up here behind the scene, as it were, of a woman. I think she's raising a wine glass. So it's a woman who is unveiled and breaking Islamic law by drinking wine. And I think that's a representation of Tahirih being happy at the murder of her uncle and breaking Islamic law. So this is a depiction of how she was seen by the people who published this book of her uncles. And I don't think you can see this other picture, but that's the picture on the grave of the uncle, again showing his murder, and behind there's a female figure raising what may or may not be a wine glass, but the same sort of thing as on this picture here. So I think to finish my presentation, what I'd like to do, as this is the last presentation of this afternoon, I'd like to just read a statement that I've written in a paper that will shortly be published in Iranian Studies. The paper is not about Tahirih, but it's about the revolutionary impact of the Babi and Baha'is in Iran on Iran. And in the course of that, I've dealt with Tahirih. And so I'm just going to read what I wrote about Tahirih in that paper, because I think it summarizes her life, and in particular the impact that she had in her life. So what I've written is, much has been written about Qurratul Ayn Tahirih, and all that will be attempted here is a summary review of the revolutionary impact that she had and continues to have on the world of women in Iran. She was born into a traditional clerical family. One way to view her life is to consider that she, like all Iranian women of that time, was handed a script at birth that she was expected to follow for the rest of her life. This script, that of a Shi'i woman as a daughter, a wife, and a mother, confined her and restricted her intellectual and social development to what would fit these roles. Tahirih, however, tore up the script that she had been given and wrote her own script. She challenged the strict traditional Usuli interpretation of Shi'i Islam that her father, husband, and father-in-law zealously advocated by adopting the Shaykhi school. She left her husband and family in order to pursue her religious and intellectual quest in Karbala. She subverted gender norms and societal expectations of the intellectual capacity of women when she taught the male students of her recently deceased teacher, Sayyid Kazim Rashdi, from behind a veil in Karbala, and is even said to have taught a circle of male students within the courtyard of the shrine of Imam Hussein in Karbala. She turned social expectations upside down when she became the leader of most of the Shaykhis in Karbala, overcoming opposition from more senior men. She pioneered a new path by being among the first to accept the revolutionary teachings of the Bab and being appointed by him among the letters of living, the first and foremost disciples of the Bab. She turned away from a millennium of religious orthodoxy by being among the earliest of his followers to realize, and probably the first to openly proclaim, the full implications of the Bab's claim to be the initiator of a new religious dispensation succeeding Islam. She defined social conventions by joyfully celebrating the birth of the Bab during the Muharram period when Shi'is were mourning the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. She accepted the social opprobrium of being divorced by her husband for her views and activities. She refuted the gendered expectations that the psychological impact of losing her children to her husband would prevent her from escaping her husband's control. She shattered the centuries-old religious and social conventions that the convention that women must be veiled in public when she appeared unveiled in public to the Babis gathered at Badasht. She spoke out loud and clear in public in a world that expected women to remain silent and submissive, indeed not to appear at all in the public space. All these revolutionary acts were done in full knowledge that they would lead to the loss of children, family, reputation, social standing, liberty, and even of life itself. In thus claiming agency, exerting power, defiantly insisting on making her own choices, and rejecting the constraints of the pathway and roles assigned to her by traditional society, Qurratul Ayn Tahirih inspired and led the way to a woman's movement in Iran. But men's lives and choices were also limited in a traditional society, although not to a lesser extent than women's. And so the way she led her life and insisted upon making her choices could also be considered as the dawn of modernity in Iran, the releasing of both men and women from the constraints of a traditional society. Thank you. And apologies for the loss of my voice towards the end of that presentation.
Thank you so much, Moojan. That was really fascinating. I'm going to remove the presentation now, and I think I will add our other two speakers back to the screen here. so that all four of us are available. We'd had a few questions earlier, and I think Omid was answering them since they were dealing with questions that referred to his particular presentation. Omid, do you want to make any comments so far about what people had asked?
Sure. Yeah, I think one friend asked where the articles can be found, and I provided the link. Maybe I can hear it.
Yeah, I saw the link there.
Yeah, I just closed it. Let me find it.
I saw it. You want me to post it again or something? People should be able to find it.
Yeah, it's here. I mean,
there it is. I put it on the bottom of the screen.
Super.
I didn't even know I could do that.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Yeah. And yeah, I just noted that the foreword, the introduction, and the article by Dr. Shayani are available at that link, open access. The other articles, unfortunately, are behind a paywall. I believe, I've only looked at this briefly, but I believe at least fair access laws in the United States, that may be different elsewhere, permit authors to share their articles with friends and researchers. So I'm going to share that if others are interested in the other articles, to reach out directly to the authors of those articles and request a copy of the article from the authors. Of course, with the understanding that the articles should not be placed indiscriminately online or shared more widely, so we don't get into any trouble with RIL.
As far as I know, that is correct. What you're saying. It used to be in the past when you published, you got a copy, piles of off prints that you could mail to people. But of course, nobody does off prints anymore, and I assume that they allow the circulation of a few copies of your paper to your friends and relatives. So if you want to get people's email addresses and you don't have them available to you, you can always write the Qur'an Truth Center at info@QuranTruthCenter.org, and we can put you in touch with the authors.
There was also a question about the original sources, the Arabic and Persian texts, original language texts for the passages I had translated or to which I referred. All the references for original language texts for my article are in my article in the footnotes. Will you allow me to share my screen?
Yeah.
It looks like it's there.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought I would share this one. This I think is the most stunning and frankly the most interesting of the passages I find that I shared. Of course, it's many references to the return of Hussein and Tahirih's writings, but this is the one that I shared the full translation of. But I thought it might be of interest to read the original Arabic. So Tahirih writes, قد أسجدوا لطلعة الحسين الذي قد كر ثم أخذوا لوجه العظم الذي قد آمن به واستقر بأنه لهو النقطة الذي قد وعده الله بالظهر وسطره الله بالسطر ولقد كتبنا في زبور من بعد الذكر أن الأرض يرثها عبادي الصالحون ولقد نزل بالبيان إنه لهو من يظهره الله يا ربي هل الذي يظهر هو قد كان غير من ظهر؟ لا وعزتك العز الأقهر لأنه قد ظهر بالبينات والزبر والإشراقات القدر فيا رب يكشف الغطاء على الكل ليشهدوا تلك الآيات سطر للإشراقيات أنوار الحسين. The reference, I believe, to this is from Dr. Muhammad Husseini's book, Hazrat Tahirih, and the page number to this, as well as the other references I mentioned, are in the footnotes to my article. There was also, I think, a question. Sorry, Rob, I'm taking over your responsibility.
Go ahead.
But there was also a question about this, which was the seal impressions that I alluded to. So this is the website. The link of it is on top. To the Harvard Library website, on which in 2012 they posted very nicely, high resolution images of manuscripts that they attributed to Tahirih. So this is the seal. Well, this is the page. It's actually the back page of a letter in Tahirih's hand that has these seal impressions. Amatuhu Tahirih, his maid, which means his maidservant or his handmaiden Tahirih, which I think it may also be Tahirih invoking one of the seals of the Bab that we find in the Bab's letters to the letters of the living that are published in the front of the Dawnbreakers. The seal there says Abduhu Adhikr. So Abd is the male form of Emma. So Abd means servant or slave, male servant, and Emma is among its feminine counterparts. So the Bab identifies himself as the servant of the remembrance, or his servant the remembrance, and Tahirih in these seals as his handmaiden or his maidservant Tahirih. And I'll just also mention, for those of you who are interested in such documents, in the same collection, interestingly, I've spent some time looking at this collection. The very last document in this collection is this. It actually is not a writing of Tahirih. This is actually a tablet of Baha'u'llah that is in the handwriting of Mirza Ghajan, of Baha'u'llah's amanuensis. So it's an interesting collection and very notable because it has this writing that is, again, not of Tahirih, but a draft. It appears to be a draft of a tablet of Baha'u'llah in the handwriting of his amanuensis. Yes, but yes.
Do I remove the thing now from the screen?
Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Now I'm looking to see what other questions we have, and let's see. I don't see it. Oh yeah, there's some more coming here. Let's see. Here we go. Well, Christine says, thank you so much, Moojan. So much background information about her place that I had never heard before. Does anyone on the panel know if Tahirih had memorized the Quran?
I have seen a statement saying that she did, yes. I can't at the moment remember where I saw it, but I have seen one, yeah.
Minu Vosuk says, I am at awe with all three presentations and the details that were shared. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the next panel about Tahirih. Halsey Taylor says, what year did Tahirih die and how? So I guess that person doesn't know the details of that. Does anyone want to fill her in?
Everyone is being very humble. So it was August of 1852, and she was executed in Persia, in the capital of Persia, Tehran.
Yeah. After
having been placed under house arrest for some time before that.
Saeed Nush Abadi says, what is the symbol of Tahirih brandishing a sword at Badasht? Anyone want to comment about that one?
Mina should take that.
Okay, Mina. You seem to be muted, maybe.
So in my understanding, what she did there was just a symbolic move. That's how I understand it. It was not an invitation to go for jihad. And I would love actually to hear Moojan and Omid giving their comments.
Do you have any additional thoughts about that, Moojan? Or Omid?
Not really. I'm not even sure it happened because it doesn't occur in most accounts. So I have a feeling it probably didn't even happen. I don't understand when it would have happened. Let's put it that way. It certainly didn't happen when she strode into the room unveiled. She didn't And I just don't know. I doubt whether it even happened.
Bill Collins says, reposting as you didn't see it on YouTube, Tahirih has been misrepresented in multiple ways to keep her veiled. Can each of you address the commonalities among your articles about this phenomenon of reveiling her as a woman and spiritual innovator? Well, Omid's nodding, so why don't you start?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. If I understand it correctly, one thought that occurs to me is there's, of course, no shortage of work that's needed to be done to continue to bring Tahirih to our collective consciousness as a species. I will say that I think that a lot has been done to bring the image of Tahirih, the hero or the heroine of the Bahá'í movement. And a lot of work has been done on her poetry. She's really celebrated as, and rightly so, for her courage, her valor, her heroism, and for her incredible poetic talents. I think less work has been done on her prose writings. And this continues to be the case. I think Dr. Banani made a very perceptive comment in the introduction to his translations of her poetry, that a proper understanding of her of Tahirih really needs a careful, I think judicious is the word that he used, examination of her prose writings. And this there's a lot of work that remains to be done in this area. Dr. Mohammed Afnan in the 1990s wrote a really important article in which he identifies some prominent themes in her prose writings specifically. And then, of course, the book that I mentioned by Dr. Mohammed Hosseini, which was the first attempt to collect or compile her prose writings in one place that had until then been scattered in works like Zuhur al-Haq or Kawakib ad-Durriyya and other texts and Azali sources. He compiled these in one place, and of course he also obtained, as I mentioned, from the Bahá'í World Center a number of manuscripts that had until then not ever been brought to light. The Harvard University has placed additional documents, as I mentioned, so there's a lot of material that needs to really be, I think it needs to be inventoried, it needs to be properly cataloged. We need to, the question of attribution perhaps is not as an important question as it has been with regards to her poetry. Critical editions of some of these prose writings would be wonderful, comparing different copies. I think working on her prose writings will continue to unveil, in using Bill's word, the image of Tahirih the scholar, Tahirih the theologian, the deeply learned theologian who was so familiar with the writings of the Bab, so familiar with Shaykhi texts. This is evident entirely from her prose writings. We know that she had, or at least the historical record tells us that she had translated the Qaim al-Asma of the Bab into Persian. That has not survived, at least as far as we know. She was teaching the Bab's commentary on Surah Kawsar, and she wrote a lot more than has survived, clearly, because we have the testimony of Muhammad Mustafa Baghdadi, one of the apostles of Baha'u'llah, who was with Tahirih. Him and his father was with Tahirih when he was very young, and he mentions in his historical tract that when she was in Iraq and later in Qazvin, he witnessed her writing each day numerous treatises and letters and responses to various ulama. Some of these I think are in the texts that have survived, and others may not have survived or may be there for us to find in the future, unveil in the future.
Additional comments?
The only two comments. Firstly, as far as sources for her writings, or some of the writings that have not yet come to light yet, I think her family actually do have quite a lot. and are keeping it very very much undercover. There's various hints here and there that they've got material which would be very valuable. One of them is letters that Tahirih wrote to her mother while she was in Baghdad. So, those would be absolutely, and it says there is a source that says they have these letters. So, we would like to see them. Okay, so that's the first thing. But my comment on the question that was asked is that one of the things that I think is worth saying is that although Baha'is have been criticized for claiming Tahirih as a sort of figure in the women's movement and as a sort of the first advocate of equality of men and women and this sort of thing, and people have said, well, there's nothing in her writings about this, so she didn't actually promote this. This is just Baha'is rewriting history, as it were, and imagining her as having been an advocate for women's rights. But actually, she may not have written about it, but her life itself was a statement of the promotion of the rights of women, this whole idea of making her own choices, of releasing herself from the constraints of a patriarchal society. Her life was the statement of the equality of men and women, even if she didn't actually write about it.
Yeah, if I may add something to what Moojan just said. Well, actually, it's not just Baha'is saying that. A scholar as prominent as Farzaneh Milani, who has researched women in Iran, and as you know, more than many other scholars, as Omid said, and he quoted her, Farzaneh Milani believes that Iran, in fact, has had three revolutions: the constitutional revolution, the 1979 Islamic Revolution, and a women's revolution that started with Tahirih and Badasht. And then she says it's not a conventional revolution, it is something that is going on. That who started it? She definitely says it started with Tahirih.
Yeah. That's certainly a very important example, milestone of Baha'i of Iranian history there. We have had a few more questions here, and I see Omid just answered one about references to the Guardian, and the question of referring to Tahirih as a suffragette. So that was very helpful. I appreciate that. I actually think we need to end now because I have another Zoom at the top of the hour. But we have been going 2 hours, and we're probably beginning to lose some of our audience. It does look like it's been dropping. So I do want to thank all three of you for your participation. And this was a really fascinating presentation. I think it's probably been the biggest one that we've had as a webinar so far. And of course, 2 weeks from now, we will be returning to this subject with 3 other members of the contributors to that particular volume. And the link is available at our website at QuranTruthCenter.org. So you can go up there, you can click through under webinars, click through to the particular webinar on the 30th of March, and you'll see a register button. So you can click right there to register. And that, I think, will be a great chance for continuing this conversation, this discussion. So that's it today from the Quran Truth Center for Baha'i Studies. And I want to thank again everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our 3 speakers today. And goodbye until then.
Okay.
I've got to get to the thing here. Let's see.